Rani, thank you very much for joining me from the car as well in the pouring down rain. This is what the busy life of a social worker is like, isn't it, Rani? Just kind
It
of,
really is. It
yeah,
really is.
starting to get to that. So, thank you for joining me. We're just going to have a bit of a conversation, aren't we? And post this for people to learn from. But if I just do a quick introduction, and then you can
Yep.
obviously introduce yourself. So, the reason I've asked you to have this conversation is because I come back once a year to listen to some presentations of newly qualified social workers in the area that I used to work. And you did your presentation this year, and I thought it was really great, the presentation, but also you used the Big Six reflective model. And I thought a video about how you use that, what your thoughts are about the Big Six, might be helpful for YouTube. Because actually, I don't know if you know this, but it always takes me by surprise. It's about the third most popular video on my YouTube is just me talking. I think I was in my kitchen, like going, "Here's the Big Six" or something. I don't know, but it's a really popular video. So I think it must be a popular model that people like. So you could maybe tell people how you've used it. But do you want to introduce yourself to start off with, and just a little bit about
Yep.
you and your background? Because I think you've got a really interesting background as well, because you're a newly qualified worker, but you've got a load of background experience, haven't you?
Yeah, so I've come into social work a little later than most people. So my background's actually in education, and I was an early years specialist, and I did that for at least 10 to 15 years. I've had the pleasure and the privilege of being able to work in inner city London, inner city Birmingham, Warwickshire, but also Qatar, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi. So a real varied mix of places. And I loved it. I loved teaching. I loved being with the kids. My favourite year group was reception. And then I just wanted something different. I was like, I need a different challenge. And I thought, I'll try social work.
And the area of social work that gone into is so different from reception as well, and that kind of age group, isn't it?
Completely different. So, yeah, so I now work with asylum children who are seeking asylum and are unaccompanied. So they're here all by themselves, and have had, very, very difficult journeys. They've had different reasons for wanting to leave their home countries. And a lot of the young people I work with are aged generally 16 or over. So completely different age group. Uh, but again, I think having worked, so in my role in education, I worked in a lot of inner city schools where English wasn't always first language, and especially when I worked abroad. So that's probably also the pull to working with children who are seeking asylum, because generally they come here and they don't have English as a first language. So,
Yeah.
so again, being able to utilise those skills, using pictures, drawing as much as possible, speaking slowly to begin with so that they can pick up on the different accents. And mine is very prominent. So, just all those little skills that you get from teaching came straight. I was able to transfer them into social work. So,
Mm.
yes, I love it. It's very interesting. It's very rewarding, especially when you can see the progress that they make, and when they get the asylum decision, and just how much they're willing to try to integrate and settle into society. Yeah, it's
Mm.
really, really lovely to see.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about
But during
actually
that,
those transferable skills. It's really interesting because I think there are so many skills that are transferable, but I hadn't thought about that as a transferable skill, which is it's really relevant where you discuss that. But you're also working in, I mean, it's such a highly politicized area that you're in. You're on the news every day and asylum seeking and migration. I mean, they're just such like big
the prominent
political
topics,
issues.
yeah, the
Yeah.
prominent topics, and I think it's very, and this is why I suppose your theory really fits well with my kind of, because it's about values. It is, it's about values and knowledge straight away. So those two things I think are crucial. I don't think people realise that you can't actually seek asylum until you're in the UK, and there aren't safe ways for people to come to the UK. And I'm not saying that we should, I'm not advocating that we allow everybody to come into the UK. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to be looking at why people are making such dangerous journeys to the UK, what the reasons might be for that, and what can we do? And it's not just the UK; it's global, isn't it? What can countries do to try to make those systems better? And then you're kind of always fighting with your personal values, your professional values, and I think a big part of it all is, and which is what my presentation was on age assessments, and that is the big part for us. So we have to make a decision on whether we think somebody is a child,
Mm.
because a lot of the people that are coming here do not have documentation. If they do, it can't really be attested. So how then do you prove whether they're a child or not? And
Yeah.
that's where I really found Big Six really helpful in trying to kind of look through and reflect on that process, because
Mm.
it's not easy, and as a team I think we would all say it's not an easy decision. And I'm not saying that I don't think any area in social work is easy. There's always difficulties and challenges in every single area, and for us I think this is our challenge. It's how do we do these assessments in a way that is fair, in a way that does keep yourself open-minded. It's really easy to get caught up in discrepancies, is the word I'm going to use, when young people are telling their stories. And I think we can get caught up in, well, you said that before and now you're saying this, so which one is it? And actually, is that relevant? Is that helping me work out what your age possibly could be? So I think for me, the inclusion of values was just so key,
Mm.
and that's what made me drawn to the Big Six.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
crucial for me.
I suppose the thing is, and maybe I've got the big six ready actually just to screen share in case people haven't seen the video about the big six. So just so that it's there for people to take a look at as we're talking, just to remind them that it's about these areas. Um, but I suppose in a way, this is the idea behind this, and the reason that I developed it was because I wanted to provide something that gave, as you say, a values led way of reflecting, but something that just gave you some of the key issues in social work. And I think these are the key issues in all areas of social work. That's my view. So, on the day that we listened to the presentations, people used different reflective models, didn't they? But a few of you used the big six and very differently. That was what was really for me, developing a model and then seeing new social workers using it was fascinating because, Angela used it to reflect on a particular incident that had happened, but you used it to reflect on that challenge of a particular work area. So you were able to work through these six and really think about each of these areas in relation to age assessment. So obviously we won't go through the presentation because that was your presentation and it was for the day. But I don't know if you'd want to say what it was about the big six that particularly drew you or how you used it even, because I think your presentation was, everybody was really engaged with what you did. So how did you use the big six to deliver that presentation or to develop it, I suppose?
Yeah, yeah, because obviously part of it was to reflect on any area of social work. So for me, it was the age assessment process. That's what I wanted to reflect on. And as you say, Siobhan, I felt like those were the areas that were prominent for me. And I think I kind of talked about, because there's such power dynamics, and we all know that in social work there is power dynamics. Social workers do hold that power, and the same applies in age assessments. That young person is hoping you are going to accept their age. So it's about not just the end goal, but how do you keep that power? How do you try to balance those power dynamics throughout the process? So giving them options, giving them choices. That's the way that we try now to make the age assessments more conducive to any kind of assessment really that's for young people. We talk emotions for me is huge. There's the emotions that we as social workers feel when we're actually doing the age assessment. There's the emotions the young person is experiencing as they're going through the process. But there's also the emotions, when you're reflecting on how things have gone, and just sometimes even in the room, and I think we all talk about this, it can get tense, it can get strained, and it's about how do we manage emotions, how do we manage our emotions, how do we manage the young person's emotions, that each other's emotions as well. And as social workers, you rely on each other to help each other through that process and make sure that the young person feels heard, that yes, it's okay to be frustrated, maybe share that frustration, and then let's take a break, let's take a breather, let's leave that space, that physical space, let's leave it and then come back and start again. Self-awareness really leads into that, and I think that's crucial. I think you have to be constantly reflecting on what's the purpose, what is the purpose. And I think you said this in the past. I feel like one of my ASYE days, what's the purpose of what you're doing today? What is that purpose? And constantly going back to that, what is the purpose of why we're here? Because like I say, you can very easily get distracted by something that has probably nothing in the end to do with what the outcome's going to be, but you can get caught up in it. So it is about having that self-awareness, and I think crucial to all of that is having that supervision. You've got to have that supervision, and that's what helps with that. And for me, this is one of the most uncertain tasks that there could be. How do you give somebody an age? If we're all being honest here, how do you assign somebody an age? Yes, we assign an age range, but even that's huge. So I feel like it's sitting with that uncertainty. That's what we've got to do. We have to sit with that uncertainty. So how do you make sure that you feel like you've done absolutely everything you can to make sure that, okay, this is the age range we've decided on, and it is based on this evidence that you have provided for us. And I thought knowledge was huge anyway. I think knowledge is huge in terms of keeping up to date with politics, but also in terms of age assessments. And I think a lot of the people, when I delivered my presentation, were really surprised that there's different calendars. It isn't 2025 all around the world at the moment. That's not fact. And I think it's knowing these things and knowing how do you then convert those dates that a young person gives. I'm not going in there and saying to them, right, what's your date of birth? And also knowing that actually millions, and I'm sure it was the 2024 report that stated by UNICEF that millions of children do not know their age and date of birth. That is fact. So we have to understand that is a fact. So when you're asking young people for their ages and dates of birth, there is absolutely every chance that they do not know this. So it's that kind of how do I gain the knowledge of what's going on globally? How can I use what I do know to try to make a decision and try to remind the young person, don't make things up. Like try, it must feel pressured when we're saying to you, yes, but have you got any idea? And trying to remind them that we might offer them suggestions, but that doesn't mean that's not, you've got to find an answer. That's just us trying to give you different ways. So again, it's that knowledge of how do I ask a question in different ways so that it might help you remember something, it might not, and that's okay as well. So for me, the module was really powerful because it helped me go through each of those different areas and reflect on all the areas, and actually bigger questions, like how do we make sure that we are staying open-minded, because that self-awareness is crucial. That power dynamic is huge. And for me, I think, and I know we've talked about it in our ASYE sessions previously, because obviously you've delivered some of them as well, about the crucial role of supervision. And that's not just your your manager supervision, that is even as a team, because I do think all of that, the big six, sums up everything we should be talking about after every age assessment. Right, what was that like for that young person? What was that like for you? What did we learn from that? Is there something that we can improve on? Is there something we can do differently as a team? And let's try it let's see how it goes. If it goes well, fantastic. If it didn't, that's okay as well. What have we learnt from that? What do we need to do differently? So, yeah, for me, I love the model.
Mm. And I think even listening to you, what I can see is the way that you've used the model in a very layered way. Like you were asked to do a reflective presentation on your choice. And even if we just take knowledge there as one of the big six, you in that presentation, you talked about the knowledge you've gained in your ASYE year about age assessments. You talked about children's knowledge of their own dates of birth, for example. And then you
Yeah,
gave some knowledge to the group. So you actually, you did it on so many different layers. And as you've just talked about it there, it's not just individual supervision, it's group supervision. And rather than taking an age assessment and using one of those old traditional models of what went well, what didn't go well, what should we do differently next time, using this model has enabled, I think, maybe a more layered approach. And certainly in the presentation, that came through that much more sophisticated kind of layered approach, I think, using this model. So would you recommend to other people then to take this? Because I think we're
absolutely.
using the model already. Because I remember you emailed me about the model and said you talked about it in a session where can I find out more, even way before the presentations. So you were obviously using it in practice.
Yeah, I used it before for a reflective piece. So for my ASYE, yeah, and that's when you said about the YouTube video. So I was one of the people who watched that video and made all my notes. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this really makes much more sense to me. This does it. Just, I would highly recommend it because, like you say, I think it's on a very basic level. We can all do what went well, what didn't go so well. Whereas I think this breaks it down into the specific areas, and it is across social work and maybe other areas, as well. I just feel like it's a higher level because it makes you really think about all these different the dynamics between you and the people the families, the children you're working with. So, and then you then go into, well, actually, what does the power dynamics look like for them? What does the power dynamics look like for me? Is that something that I'm happy with? And then does that fit with my values? No, it does. Yes, it doesn't. How am I going to change that? How can we improve that? And just talking to young people, you can gauge how they're feeling. You can see how they're feeling. You can see if they're feeling included in those sessions, if they're feeling like you are hearing their voice. Are you, or are you just ignoring it and doing what we want to do because this is the way that we've been told we should do it? So, yeah, for me, I love the model and I would highly recommend it to both new social workers and experienced social workers.
Mm. Well, thank you ever so much. And I tell you what really comes through from you, Rani, is and came through on the presentation, but comes through today as well, is just your passion for children and young people, and that whole career of working with, early years. You've worked with early years and now you're working with that sort of end of childhood, early adulthood. So you've got the both ends of the spectrum of childhood. And the passion that you bring for, fairness and justice and being child focused and child centered is amazing, and it kind of shines through you, which is what we need in social workers as well. So
Thank you.
fabulous, and thank you for joining me, and even on a day where I know you've got to go from one thing to another and that's why you sat in the car in the pouring down rain joining me on a
No
Zoom
problem. Thank
call.